My name is Rashna Kumar. I'm a Pulse 2025 Research Fellow at the Internet Society and a PhD candidate at Northwestern University. Today, I'll be presenting my work titled When Consolidation is Not a Choice. In this work, I look at where web infrastructure is consolidated in the hands of a few providers for key Internet services, and whether that consolidation stems from deliberate choices or structural constraints within a country. This project was done in collaboration with Marhino, Amrish, and Fabian. I'll start by describing what I mean by web infrastructure. Every website depends on a few core services, such as DNS to translate domain names to IP addresses, hosting providers to serve the content, and if the website uses HTTPS, certificate authorities to verify the server's SSL certificates to secure the website. These critical services are now consolidating among a few major players globally. If you recognize these logos, it is because these few companies now run a huge share of the global web's foundational services. This growing consolidation creates a resilience risk. A single provider's failure can affect thousands of services. And this isn't hypothetical. In just the last 2 months, we have seen three major outages. AWS went down, affecting thousands of services from banks to smart devices. Signal, Canvas, Piazza, Snapchat, Duolingo were some of the 2,000 companies affected by this outage. Cloudflare's failure also took down large portions of the web, including platforms like X and ChatGPT. And Microsoft Azure's outage impacted services like Microsoft 365, impacting business operations and communication and airline systems. Together, these incidents reveal how even the most sophisticated providers can become single points of failure, impacting everything from banks and airlines to education and healthcare platforms. The issue of infrastructure consolidation, however, isn't new. Researchers have been tracking this for years, but the pace keeps accelerating. This is especially worrying as governments increasingly move their essential public services online. From tax filing and healthcare to immigration, licensing, and even voting, digital platforms have become the default way citizens interact with the state. Any disruption here blocks people from accessing essential rights and benefits. And the scale of this shift is massive. For instance, in the US, federal websites draw nearly 2 billion visits every month. In the Asia Pacific region, about 77% of citizens primarily access government services through digital platforms. Prior work has shown that government hosting markets are being shaped by the same consolidation trends that characterize the global web. For example, Cloudflare alone hosts e-services for 49 governments and carries up to 72% of government web traffic for one country. And large cloud providers now market government-specific platforms, which can potentially further steer governments towards a small set of global players. The central question we wanted to explore in this work is, do governments actually have a choice? Are they consolidated because they have to or because they choose to? In some cases, it could be a matter of constraint. Governments might not have domestic infrastructure options, or the local market may lack competitive services. These structural limitations can lead much of the web, not just government websites, to rely on the same few providers, creating shared dependencies. But in other cases, governments may have options but still choose to be consolidated on providers that are reliable, cost effective, or backed by long standing vendor relationships. In those situations, consolidation reflects a strategic choice. To determine when consolidation is constraint driven and when it's choice driven, we take a comparative experimental approach. We treat each country as a block, meaning the infrastructure, regulation, and market conditions are held constant within that block. This fixes the structural environment. Within each block, we compare government domains to regional commercial domains stratified by popularity. So we look at large actors, mid-tier ones, and smaller local sites. Large sites have more resources, more engineering capacity, and often access to global providers. Smaller sites do not. so including mid-tier and low-traffic strata prevents this bias. Then we ask, do governments follow the same consolidation patterns as the other groups in their environment? If they do, it points to structural forces shaping everyone's choices, but if they stand apart, that divergence suggests a deliberate strategic decision on the government's part. To answer our question at scale, we start by collecting data from 61 countries, spanning every continent and covering over 82% of the world's internet population. For each country, we collect domains from two categories: government websites and commercial websites. To build our dataset, we compile a comprehensive list of government websites and split Google Crux dataset into top, middle, and bottom popularity tiers. From each tier, we sample 1,000 sites. To extract web service infrastructure information, we connect through a VPN endpoint in each country and collect all resource URLs on the landing page and their hosting providers, the authoritative DNS name servers, and the TLS certificate authorities. To quantify provider concentration, we use HHI, which is a standard economic measure of market concentration. For each country, each service, and website group, we generate 5,000 bootstrap samples to get a distribution of HHI values. Then, to assess whether governments are more or less consolidated than commercial sites, we compute the difference in HHI between them. We check whether that difference is statistically significant. And finally, we compare those patterns across countries. If difference in consolidation isn't significant, it suggests governments resemble commercial sites, pointing to structural or environmental constraints. If difference in consolidation is significant, it means governments make a choice-driven decision to consolidate. We begin by analyzing how consolidated government infrastructure is across three key services: certificate authorities, DNS, and hosting. The colors here reflect HHI thresholds that are commonly used in antitrust regulation. Red indicates high consolidation, yellow moderate, and blue low. Certificate authorities here show the highest level of consolidation globally. DNS exhibits more variation between countries, while hosting tends to be more moderate overall, though a few countries show high levels of consolidation. Next, we look at countries where consolidation levels and provider diversity are similar across both government and commercial sectors. These plots highlight these countries across services. Australia is a good example here. Across all three services, certificate authorities, DNS, and hosting, we see that government and commercial sites in Australia rely on the same set of global providers. In Australia's case, this pattern seems to reflect the structural factors. In fact, the Australian government does say it follows a cloud-first and multi-vendor strategy. Now we look at cases where government consolidation diverges from commercial patterns. On the map, red indicates countries where government infrastructure is more consolidated than the commercial sector. Teal shows the reverse. India offers a striking example here of strategic divergence. Many Indian government sites use a domestic certificate authority called e-Madhura, which reduces dependence on global certificate authorities and results in lower consolidation compared to commercial sites. However, for DNS and hosting, it's the opposite. Over 85% of Indian government sites rely on National Informatics Center, the country's central IT agency. This results in extremely high consolidation compared to commercial sites. Kazakhstan is another interesting example of strategic government consolidation. For DNS and hosting, we see strong consolidation among government domains, mainly driven by state-linked and domestic providers. For Kazakhstan, certificate authority usage, however, doesn't diverge much between government and commercial sectors. Algeria, like Kazakhstan, shows strategic consolidation in government infrastructure for DNS and hosting. For DNS, shockingly, all government domains rely on Cloudflare, a global provider, whereas commercial sites show more diversity. In hosting, the consolidation is domestic. Over 80% of government sites are hosted by Telecom Algeria, whereas commercial sites show more diversity. And for certificate authorities, even in Algeria, there is no notable divergence. Both government and commercial sites in Algeria rely on the same major global certificate authorities. So, a framework helps us separate where governments end up highly consolidated because they don't have many options, that is, there are structural limits, from where they make strategic choices that lead to consolidation. With this lens, we can now look at what these findings mean for policy and the future of the web. So, what can we do with these findings? First, wherein consolidation is structural, we can support countries by investing in their infrastructure, helping them build out local DNS, hosting, and certificate authority capacity. Second, where consolidation is strategic, there is an opportunity for policy nudges. Governments might not need to rely so heavily on a single provider, and small shifts could reduce unnecessary dependency. And this is where Internet Society can play a role by helping governments with both infrastructure development and policy engagement, through which we can move towards a more resilient Internet overall. Finally, this is very much an ongoing work. We're now extending our analysis in a few key directions. One, we're clustering countries based on their regulatory and market characteristics to see whether common patterns of structural or strategic consolidation emerge. Two, we are examining the implications of consolidation, especially strategic consolidation, for instance, to assess whether it correlates with greater exposure to foreign infrastructure that includes offshore hosting, reliance on dominant DNS providers, or foreign certificate authorities. Finally, on path dependencies is also a potential future direction, determining whether the same structural or strategic forces that drive consolidation of core web services also shape these on path patterns. Thanks for attending my talk. I would love to take any questions.
Thank you, Rashna. You did an amazing job speaking at this time of the day for you. Thank you very much for that. Do we have questions?
Thanks for the interesting talk. I think one thing when you're probably exploring these strategic concerns, I was thinking is also whether it can be proxied maybe by how much there is, say, corruption or sort of some of these other motivations that governments might have in a market setting to get in bed with these providers. Because I suspect that maybe where that's looser, they could get away with partnering with some of these agencies and not having to justify. But then maybe where it's much tighter, where I think you gave the example of Australia, I think it is possible that it might be difficult for them to get away with that. I think there's some data on this from DSP and VDEM. I think they document some of these things. So that might be useful future analysis as well. Thanks.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'll definitely take a look at this. I think that is one of our next steps to group countries into clusters that have like similar patterns of regulations and market forces. And so, yeah, thanks for pointing these sources out. I'll definitely take a look at them.
Thank you for the very cool presentation and super interesting angle. I really like it. So one of the comments actually was related to the previous one, where I was wondering like if I was in a country where, how to say, errors are penalized in a way that is a little bit harsher than other ones, I might decide to go, for example, with the safe option of Cloudflare or whichever other one is the provider, rather than taking the technical risk on me of doing the wrong choices or having potential complications by having multiple providers. So that's something that might matter as well. I was also wondering, like, not all the sites are the same, right? There are some sites that for a government might have very strong implications in terms of visibility, population not being happy if something goes wrong, versus commercial sites. If I have a blog, probably it's completely irrelevant whether my blog gets hacked. But for example, there was this very prominent hacks in the UK with the British Library, Jaguar and Land Rover, which had several points of GDP, percentage points of GDP affected. So maybe finding commercial sites that are more comparable could be a good idea because they probably have different types of vulnerability. And the last point I wanted to make is in different countries, you might have different prices of and availability of expertise. For example, in the UK, you might have a lot of availability of expertise, but it might be very hard to acquire. And therefore, governments might decide to take the easier option. Maybe in other countries, availability of expertise is very scarce. Maybe in other countries, there is a lot of expertise and it's not relatively expensive. So it's actually easy to get a good, solid team of IT people. But anyhow, thank you very much. Really cool work.
Thank you so much for pointing these directions. These are definitely some very cool directions that we'll definitely look into.
Thank you. We'll stop questions for now. Thank you, Rashna, very much.
Thank you so much.